every municipality has the opportunity to create their own code of conduct, uh, best suiting the needs of their specific community, their specific council. The Municipal Government Act does prescribe some some minimum requirements, I think, for lack of a better term. They must include certain points, certain aspects in order for them to be valid, or that's just that in order for them to comply with legislation. But they are very much personalized from community to community.
Welcome to Municipal Affairs. Today, we're taking a closer look at a key element of accountability in municipal governance: council code of conduct investigations. Unlike other administrative investigations like workplace disputes, or regulatory reviews, or even sports compliances, council code of conduct complaints undergo a single-prong evaluation before they even get off the ground. Investigators ask a simple but crucial questions to themselves. If the allegation were true, would it reasonably violate the council code of conduct? Now, this hypothetical evaluation prevents unnecessary investigations, saving time, resources, and public funds. But that's not all. Many code of conducts add layers of complexity with specific requirements for a complaint to even be valid. Joining us to unpack this topic is Christopher Palfy, Director of Municipal Government Investigations with Veritas Solutions. Together, we are going to explore how municipalities apply this process and what it means for governance and accountability for municipalities. Christopher, thank you so much for sitting down with me and talking about this important issue that is often, how do I say this without saying it incorrectly, misunderstood from a council perspective, but also from a public perspective. And that is a council code of conduct investigation, but also a council code of conduct. So before we get into the crux of the interview, I've got to ask a simple launching pad question, and that is, what is a code of conduct in the realm of a municipal council?
Um, so the Municipal Government Act in Alberta, which, as you know, kind of governs how municipalities elect their officials, their roles, responsibilities, and that sort of thing, requires that every elected council have a code of conduct. I think it's Section 146.1 of the Municipal Government Act of Alberta, and essentially, like those rules, that code of conduct is simply a set of codified rules and regulations that help guide counselors in their behavior and in their day-to-day activities as elected officials.
Is a code of conduct similar for every single municipality, or like every municipality, they have their own unique takes on a council code of conduct bylaw or policy?
Well, that's a great question, actually. Every municipality has the opportunity to create their own code of conduct, uh, best suiting the needs of their specific community, their specific council. The Municipal Government Act does prescribe some some minimum requirements, I think, for lack of a better term. They must include certain points, certain aspects in order for them to be valid, or that's just that in order for them to comply with legislation. But they're very much personalized from community to community.
So what is, and I'm just picking municipalities in Alberta off the top of my head here, so please apologize for anyone who I'm about to pick on here. So a code of conduct, a policy or bylaw could be different in the Village of Alex compared to Clearwater County, or the MD of Opportunity to Crow's Nest Pass. So every municipality could be different, but the general premise of a code of conduct policy is going to be similar.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. You're exactly right. Some some codes of conduct that I've read are extremely specific, and they go in depth into certain issues where they assign higher risk, and so they must feel as though they need to be explained further or further clarified to ensure that there's compliance. Whereas others
Like what,
are,
if you don't mind me asking? I apologize
um,
to put you on the spot there.
that's okay. Pecuniary interest is or conflicts of interest are two areas that are obviously higher risk areas that I think many or some communities and some codes of conduct that I've read go much more into depth and describe and or prohibit or at least define what is acceptable and what is not as far as conflict of interest or the needs or the requirements around pecuniary interests.
Reason we're talking about this is twofold. One, you recently posted on LinkedIn about the anatomy of a council code of conduct. But two, during our year in review questionnaire that we sent out to people who follow the show, we had the reoccurring theme about more clarity around council code of conducts. When do council code of conducts come into force or the investigation process start? Is it a vote by council? Is it a vote or is it just a motion by council? Is the CAO recommending it? How do councils get to the point where they need to bring someone in to start investigating a potential breach of the council code of conduct?
There's one of the spots where it varies from town to town or community to community. Some codes of conducts uh, are simply that they have appointed an integrity commissioner, and whenever there's a complaint that's received, the onus is on the integrity commissioner to evaluate that complaint, see if it complies with, or if it, or if, if the code of conduct has jurisdiction over whatever the complaint is, and then subsequently carrying out an investigation. So, um, and
But there's got to be some that are frivolous, though, right?
yeah,
Like,
there are.
I'm not trying to be, not trying to like call a spade, but when we're talking about council, we're talking about politics, and politics can be very partisanship and very political along those lines. So, is there a threshold that a investigator or someone must take to ensure the validity of a council code of conduct investigation?
Absolutely. And it's funny that you use the term threshold because we also conduct what we call so there's two types of investigations, two primary types of investigations that we would conduct on council codes of conduct. The first being the threshold analysis. So this is where we determine does this behavior, if accepted as true, is it within the jurisdiction of the code of conduct? And again, if accepted as true, just for preliminary purposes, would it constitute a potential breach of one of the various sections of the code of conduct? And if the answer is yes, we bring that. It depends. I mean, it depends, right? How many times do you hear that in municipal government or when you're speaking with lawyers? Uh, we might bring that analysis to council for their consideration. And ultimately, at the end of the day, some council, it's up to them to decide what to do with it. Many codes of conduct don't mandate that an integrity commissioner or an outside investigator has to be retained. In fact, and I have opinions on it, but some codes of conduct allow for counselors to conduct the investigations themselves, and so long as they're not a party to the investigation.
Seriously? Isn't
Yep.
that the wolf guarding the sheep a little bit there?
Well, I think it is. When you're dealing with something like that, even if, I mean, investigations can be very complex, and an investigator needs to be properly qualified and understand, the principles of natural justice, procedural fairness, interviewing principles, gathering evidence, and they need to understand all these things and have a good grasp on these things in order to conduct a proper, legally defensible investigation. Now, council members may have those skills. However, there's also an apprehension of bias associated with a council member perhaps investigating another council member. Now, it could either be internally, where a political thing, where I have a political opponent now who is investigating my behavior. So the respondent, or the person who is subject to the complaint, might be able to raise a very valid legal argument that said that they were biased in their investigation. The other thing too is that when you're conducting internal investigations like that, the investigator is not third party, it's not immune. They're aware of all the smoke. They're aware of all the noise. They're aware of all the infighting that a normal person might not be aware of. They're aware of many other issues, and these may come into play, and they may not be able to mitigate that bias when they're conducting the investigation. On the flip side, so the respondent might feel that they're being unfairly targeted, or subject to political vindictiveness based on the results of the investigation. But on the flip side, a member of the public would likely not have. I mean, I can only speak for myself, but if I were to see that carried out and I see a counselor investigating, seeing the mayor or a reeve for an investigation, how could I possibly think that that would be an unbiased investigation? The perception is that it wouldn't be, and that therefore the results of the investigation would be suspect, which kind of defeats the entire purpose of the code of conduct, in my opinion, which is to use it as a tool which enhances transparency and accountability. It's a signal to elected officials that there are rules to follow, and they will be held accountable if they don't follow them. But it also signals to members of the public that these elected officials are willing to be held to a high standard. They're willing to subject themselves to a code of conduct that governs how they act and behave. And to me, that's just good governance. That enhances trust, right? And so if you have that, why would you defeat that by conducting investigations, or hiring your CAO to conduct the investigation, or having your in-house lawyer conduct the investigation? There's going to be that apprehension of bias, and I don't think that's would be very easy to mitigate.
We'll probably come back to that conversation in a few minutes here, but
Yeah, sure.
I want to stick on something you said just in that statement, the truth of the evaluation process. Now, I can't believe I have to ask this in 2025, but what does the truth, what is considered the truth when it comes to the investigation process of a potential code of conduct investigation? Because what I believe is true and what you believe are true are, in the political realm, is going to be two completely opposite. If you believe you've been accused of wrongdoing in the code of conduct, you're going to believe what you're done is true. If you're being accused, the person who's accusing you is going to believe that their truth is right. How does the investigator get to the final truth? The old adage of there's always three sides to the story. There's side A, there's side B, and there's the actual truth. How does the investigator get to the final truth to make the recommendation to go into a full investigation?
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. I like to use the term, or the phrase, there are two sides to every story and the truth lies in the middle. But that's not actually accurate. Generally speaking, the truth will lie on one side or the other. So how we come to the truth is we use the civil standard of balance of probabilities, which just simply means it is more likely than not that A happened over B. And that standard is based on an analysis of the information that's provided. Now, part of that information, part of the evidence that deal. A large part of the evidence is testimony of witnesses, the testimony of the complainant, the testimony of the respondent, and those are all subjected to a credibility assessment. And that
So,
credibility assessment,
so I just want to
sorry?
just clarify that before you go on. Is there assumption of truth in that process or no?
No, no, there's no assumption of truth. I mean, assuming somebody's telling the truth or giving them the benefit of the doubt, so to speak, to me is indicative of a potential bias. And so what you do is you just simply gather the information. And this why it's so advantageous to have an outside third party do it because there's no ties. They're not tied to the community, they're not tied to the people, and they could just simply collect the information and make that determination, right? So there's no assumption of truth whatsoever. There's the allegation, and let's say in this case, in this hypothetical case, it meets the threshold of a valid complaint. We take that, and then our first step is to interview the complainant, conduct a credibility assessment on the complainant. Is the information reliable, and do they impress as honest? So there's kind of two forks to credibility: is honesty and reliability. And so we examine things like, do they have a motive? Do they have, is there sufficient detail? Is there nuance? How are they presenting? How these types of things, and then we record those observations factually, and then when we kind of compile it all in the credibility assessment, you can look at it and you can say this person is credible, or this person is not credible, or this person is credible on certain things but not credible on others, based on these multiple factors and observations that I've recorded. So in that, then we complete that process for the respondent and the complainant. The complainant is the person, obviously, that has lodged the complaint. The respondent is the person who the complaint is about, and potentially any other witnesses. So when you do that, even if you only have they said situation, you're still able to come to a finding on a balance of probabilities because the information in these cases, it doesn't have to be overwhelming. Like I said before, more likely than not. So you're looking at 51% versus 49%, right? Oftentimes the information is, like, I would say, far more slanted than that. But really, you just have to be leaning one way or the other based on an evidentiary analysis.
As an investigator who has probably done some of these investigations of council code of conducts,
Mhm.
how do you ensure you don't become biased in the situation? Because everyone, when they're getting investigated, will feel like they're being attacked. As the investigator, you have to look at both sides equally and fairly to hear everyone out. Yes, there is that middle ground where the truth lies, but you have to make sure that the person who's being investigated, but also the one who has launched a complaint or the code of conduct has been filed by. How do you ensure, as the investigation process unfolds, it stays neutral and unbiased against any political figure, because that's what the people are, is political figures.
Yeah, that's a good question. Essentially, rely on the evidence, right? You don't rely on personal feelings, and then you
Is that
simply
hard?
analyze
Because we're all human.
we're all human, yes, but there are ways that we can mitigate bias, potential bias, right? One very simple way, if we're going to try to mitigate bias or kind of go through the process and present as fair, is in how you treat people. Uh, every person in an investigation is entitled to dignity, to be treated with dignity and respect, and that's the big thing. Is I call interviews, and one of my colleagues said this the other day, and I really liked it, and I'm going to steal it from her. Is a conversation with a purpose. And that purpose is to gather information. So the conversation will be about a specific topic. And essentially, you create an environment where the person feels as comfortable as they can in the circumstances. I get that participating in an investigation can be nerve-wracking, especially if you're the respondent or if you're the complainant and you have a significant emotional, you feel like you've been wronged significantly, or you have an emotional attachment to whatever the complaint is. It can be traumatic. We're trauma informed. We're aware of trauma issues as they come up in an investigation, and we do our best to try to work within that environment that's created and ensure that people are treated fairly. And at the end of the day, if you look at a recorded conversation between myself and the person I'm interviewing, there's not going to be any derogatory words used on my part unless I'm asking for clarification and I'm repeating them for evidentiary purposes. Or, you know, it's not an adversarial relationship. It's not an interrogation whatsoever. These are all sort of environments where you get, if you try to conduct those, especially virtually, if you tried to conduct that, I think you'd get very little information, and the person your interview would likely shut down or be extremely guarded.
During the
Does that
investigation
answer your
process.
question?
It does, but every time you answer a question, I get like five more questions that I need answered because the great thing about this conversation is there's a lot of people out there right now who are going, what goes into these investigations? What is the process? You talk about the interview, but the where does it start? Because I know that this topic of conversation has been very prominent at RMA, Rural Municipalities of Alberta, at AB Munis, because there has been a sense that the code of conduct complaint process has been politicized for against each other's counselors because of bad feelings or someone made my lunch wrong the one day. At the very beginning of the process, do council members, the mayor, the reeve, have to sign some type of non-disclosure clause that whatever is talked about in those meetings isn't used in council meetings or is aired into the general public? Because I can imagine tempers could flare during the investigation process or even during the initial code of conduct complaint.
Yeah, they certainly can. Uh, Most codes of conduct do have a confidentiality clause in them. They're built right in. So if somebody is subject to an investigation, confidentiality is automatic. It's implied, or it's not implied. It's expressed in the code of conduct. As far as members of the public goes, we do ask them to keep the conversations confidential. We're very careful about the information that we provide after the fact, in order to protect people's identities, people's personal information, certain issues. So they have to be FOIP compliant before, or if, because council may sometimes vote not to release the report, but they have to be FOIP compliant if they are released to the public. So they have to be properly redacted and vetted. Um, but yeah, there is confidentiality. Now, that being said, a member of the public is not bound by the council code of conduct. Um, but we still do ask for confidentiality.
So during the process of the investigation, was not even at the part where we're going to be talking about what happens after the investigation, which is the big part that I want to dive into a little bit. During the investigation process, you have to write a report that is recommendations to council. Do the complaint, so the person who has the council code of conduct violation filed against them, do they get to see the complaint before the actual complaint goes to the full council, or do they get to see it at the exact same time?
Um, that's a good question. Oftentimes, those types of things are handled um, apart from the investigator. So we provide the report to our point of contact, and then council would vote on it or would deliberate over it. I would assume that in most cases, when there's a vote being cast, that the persons that are subject to the council code of conduct, if they're a complainant and or a respondent, that they would be excused from the meeting for temporarily, or at the very least would have to abstain from the vote.
What is,
Um,
continue, go ahead, sorry.
so they get council should get um, the same version, if you will, or iteration of the report that the complainant would get as well.
What can a person who's being investigated do to prepare for an investigation?
Um, I mean, I suppose it depends on the.
That's a million
It
dollar
depends.
question. I
Yeah,
apologize, but
that's
um,
fine, but it depends on
but
the risk
like,
involved in
go ahead.
it depends on the risk involved in the investigation. You can have very serious allegations that may have civil repercussions as far as lawsuits and that kind of stuff that goes. And I know that um, especially around like pecuniary interest or conflict of interest type activities, they can be significant, right? So the penalties or the fallout can be significant. So I think they can always seek legal advice from a municipal government lawyer. Um, Most codes of conduct allow them to seek advice. I think many prescribe that it has to be paid for privately. It can be paid for with municipal funds, and you know I was a police officer before this life, and what I always say is like you can always get advice from a lawyer. You can always speak to a lawyer about this, what it means, what are the potential implications, and if they're worried, that's the first thing that I would recommend somebody doing if I wasn't the investigator. But I would inform them that they have that right and they can access that if they wish.
What's the pitfalls that you don't recommend people do during an investigation process?
Go public. I think opening things up to the public and violating the confidentiality aspects of the investigation. I think it's the number one thing. Retaliation. Be respectful. Respect the process. Whether you agree with it or not. But don't start a campaign against your accuser or vice versa. It diminishes credibility, but it also makes the process extremely muddy and difficult to work through. Um, and there's too much noise, if you understand what I mean. So yeah, I think the big thing is, don't take to social media and exclaim your innocence or proclaim your innocence or anything like that, because I don't think anything good ever comes of that. So
So the investigator who investigates the code of conduct complaint, they make their recommendations to the point person. The point person then makes the recommendations to council. How long typically, and I know, and I say this knowing that you're going to say it depends. How long traditionally is an investigation process? Could it be weeks? Could it be days? Could it be months? Could it be years?
Um, I mean, I don't think it'll be years. I suppose, imagine, like I said, it depends, but I've not encountered one that's taken years before. I couldn't even imagine the scope of a multi-year investigation. But essentially, most codes of conduct prescribe, or not most, some of the ones that I've reviewed say that complaint or investigations must be completed within 30 days, 90 days. 90 days is usually the number, and I mean it's somewhat arbitrary, but 3 months is a good amount of time in order for an investigator to gather all the information they need, analyze the data, analyze the evidence, come to a finding. And you said recommendations, investigator recommendations. we try not to recommend.
I
We
realized
come
that
to find.
literally as I said it out loud.
Yeah.
It was like,
So
whoa.
we come to findings. Yeah. So we come to findings on a balance of probabilities, and I'll talk to you about why the investigator shouldn't be recommending things in a bit. But you know what? Depending on the nature of the investigation, even a fairly in-depth or complex one, as long as there's everybody, all the stars align, and you're able to interview everybody that's required, 90 days is plenty of time in order to open, investigate, and prepare a report. So,
Can someone refuse to accept the findings of the investigation?
um, yeah, of
So,
course they
so,
can.
so no, but like the entire council. So hypothetically, it goes to the investigation process. The point person gives the report saying, "Here's the investigation. Here's what we found," and then council says, "We don't believe you. Go back and do it again." Can they do that or no?
I suppose they could. I've not encountered that yet.
Which is good, I guess.
But yeah, our
Because
our
because the
I
reason
mean,
I
I think.
asked the follow-up
Go
question
ahead.
is going to be ultimately the investigation process is trying to find the truth of the matter. Ultimately,
Yes.
at the end of the day, that's exactly what it is. The truth of the matter is written within that code of conduct that council has passed themselves. How enforceable is that code of conduct at the end of the day? Because they've passed it. If they say, okay, we agree with your investigation, but we're not going to follow through with it. Is that possible?
Well, yeah, I think like because at the end of the day, it's going to be council. If they impose, if there's any sanctions to be imposed, it's going to be council that imposes and votes on on those potential sanctions towards the subject person subject to the complaint or the respondent. Um, but that's entirely council's prerogative. They could say, okay, yeah, on a balance of probabilities, the finding is that so and so did breach the code of conduct, and based on a reasonable interpretation, and so it's founded. The complaint is founded, but it's not a big deal. So we're going to verbally reprimand them and move on. Because you have to, like, they can't remove counselors there's no provision in a code of conduct for um, the removal of an elected official. And as you know, immersed in municipal politics as you are, it's actually very rare that the province even steps in to remove an elected official. So, and I mean, we had a conversation about that this morning, and there's probably a lot of reasons why. Hopefully, one is they don't want to interfere in municipal politics, and two, if they step in to remove elected officials, what's to say that somebody can't step in to remove them as well? So, but um,
You
so they
talked
don't have
about,
to. They don't have.
go ahead.
Yeah, they don't have to follow through with anything as far as sanctions go. They could say, yeah, that you did this. It's not a big deal. We're moving on. Or, the person has already written an apology as a result, and that's sufficient. So we're accepting the report, and now the matter is closed, and we're moving on.
So I want to loop back to the statement that you said just a few seconds ago that we were going to follow up on. We're going to follow up on it right now. Why don't the investigators make the recommendation of what the sanction should be if they are found that they have breached the code of conduct?
It's it's uh, it's just to avoid bias, right? So if you have an
But
investigator.
isn't, and I apologize to interrupt, but isn't the whole point of the investigation to find the truth? And the truth is what it is, and there's always going to be a bias in that final truth because someone's going to always say that they were wronged or not wronged.
No, like the investigator's bias. I mean, so
Okay.
the investigator, yeah, everybody else is biased. I mean, and investigators have biases. We all have biases.
Yeah.
We mitigate those biases, and certainly if we came across in, and I'm going on a bit of a tangent, but please humor me. If we came across in an investigation where the investigator says, well, the one witness or the complainant is actually my uncle, well, certainly that's not a good investigation for them to undertake. So they would likely excuse themselves, or we would excuse them and pick another investigator, right? So we mitigate bias, our own investigator bias in that way, and being aware of potential biases, and then simply relying on facts. Uh, how you word things in a report is also vital to avoiding that apprehension of bias. So if you're using words like arrogant, self-centered, or whatever, that's an inflammatory word or phrase. Whereas you could say things like consistently rejected others' explanations and insisted that they were correct. I mean, that could imply arrogance. You could say that that implies arrogance in real life, but you never include that word in a report because it's inflammatory and it shows a little bit of bias. But sorry, I go on tangents sometimes. But getting back to my point about why we don't provide by recommendations,
Recommendations.
or why we shouldn't, is yes, the investigator has um, interviewed people and come to a reasonably unbiased conclusion on what happened and what occurred. Now, that's based on the relevant facts. The investigators also has access to other facts as well. Like you alluded to earlier, things can sometimes get heated or controversial in an interview. Perhaps the complainant or the respondent yelled and screamed and swore at the investigator and called them incompetent, or because for whatever reason, right? So in the report, you can rely on the facts of what they said or what they didn't say, but in real life, you have access, like in your memory, to all that noise, right? Whereas somebody who is reading the report, another third party, another party that's reading the report, doesn't have that contextual information, and therefore they can simply make a recommendation based on the contents of the report. And members of the public and other people can be reasonably comfortable that at the very least, as far as conduct within the investigation goes, it was done so unbiasedly.
What
Does that
training
make
do you,
sense?
it does. What training do you have to be an investigator in 2025? Because
Ah,
you openly admit it, your previous career life was a police officer. Is every investigator a police officer? Is every investigator needing to be in law enforcement? Because and I'm not saying this has happened, and I would never want to hope. I I would hope this has never happened, but there's probably some investigations in code of conduct, whether it be money wise or just challenges within interpersonal development. But there's a potential sexual harassment aspect of the council code of conduct as well. And I'm just looking at what's going on here in Canada, not here in Alberta, but I see the stories that come out about the challenges that some municipalities are facing with that. You have to deal with some very sensitive information, very sensitive subjects. What background does an investigator need to ensure that they're doing it correctly and above board to ensure that no one feels harmed, no one feels threatened during the investigation process?
that's a really good question. Uh, investigators they they need to have certain characteristics or traits. They need to be very pragmatic, discerning. When I say discerning, is that they're able to kind of, that doesn't make sense to me. I want to know more. So that inquisitive mind, the ability to write factually yet compellingly, um, um, being aware and having training with respect to what are the principles of natural justice? What is a procedurally fair investigation? Staying up to date on case laws that affect how investigations are completed and conducted in order to maintain that fairness. Because if you're not conducting a fair investigation, then there's no point in conducting the investigation. The findings need to be able to withstand legal scrutiny in order for them to be considered valid or
What's natural
fair.
justice?
What is natural justice? So essentially, I mean, natural justice, procedural fairness. It's the idea that that essentially what I was just talking about, that the process needs to be fair for all the parties. So in the case of code of conduct investigations, or really any administrative investigations, whether it be a sport code of conduct or regulatory investigations or workplace investigations, is that for one, the respondent has the right to know, and now we can get into whistleblower policy, which I admit I'm not really an expert on, but generally speaking, the respondent has a right to know who their accuser is and what the information or what the accusations are. Um, and they also have the right to respond. If, you know, in most cases, under policy, they're like in employment policy and in some codes of conduct, they're required to respond, but it's also their right to respond and to, they have, so if you're conducting a procedurally and very fair investigation, you're notifying the complainant as soon as practical that there is a complaint against them. This is the information that has been brought forward. It doesn't have to be exhaustive, like they're accused of harassment or breaching the code of conduct, section H, by not declaring a pecuniary interest or something like that. And this is the person that has brought it forward, and you'll be afforded an opportunity to respond to the information that's been brought forward against you. So, and if you can check off all those boxes, um, you know, absent any obscure legal arguments, generally speaking, you know, and you have to mitigate bias as well. But generally speaking, um, that process will be procedurally fair.
You talk about how the accused has the right to know who their accuser is, which is understandable, and hence why that's same as in the court systems. Do investigations ever get to the point where they have to be rescinded because the accused just doesn't want, or the accuser just doesn't want to go forward anymore because they're afraid for political ramifications or anything around that, around the council code of conduct? Because that's a lot to put yourself out there, but I'm assuming if they've gotten to that point where they have started the process of filing a code of conduct, they are willing to put their name on the piece of paper that says, yes, I'm accusing my fellow counselor of doing something nefarious.
Yeah, potentially. I've not encountered it, but yeah, potentially um, there's situations where they may reverse their testimony or rescind their complaint. And at the end of the day, that's all information that's just brought to council for them to make a determination on what to do next.
Talking about the role of code of conducts in today's society, how do the specific sizes of the municipality dictate what type of investigation is going on? I'm going to rephrase that in a better way here for a second, because not everyone's going to have a large amount of money to put in towards doing an investigation, and hiring a company like Veritas Solutions or hiring somebody else. And then we talk about the internal investigation or integrity commissioner, getting that going as well. It all depends on the size of your community and how much money and resources you have going into it. What should smaller municipalities do when they do have a council code of conduct that is what needed to be investigated? Is it start looking to find money, or is there ways or companies like Veritas Solutions that can help with those smaller communities who may be financially strapped for money?
Well, You've stumped me there. I don't know the answer to that. What I'd say is like what are the potential um I mean, I understand, especially in this day and age, that money and funds, especially in the smaller communities that don't have a large tax base, they don't have a lot of taxes to draw on in order to kind of fill their coffers, so to speak, that cost is always a consideration. And unfortunately, I think that some communities decide not to hire an investigator or have an investigator conduct an investigation based on cost. And while I understand, like I totally understand that, um, cost to me shouldn't be the reason that you don't conduct an investigation or you don't hire an investigator. The biggest thing is risk, right? What's the risk? Is it relatively low risk? Is the complaint so um, is it not a, for lack of a better term, is it a big deal or not? And if the complaint is that the Reeve was seen speeding in a school zone and therefore contravened section X of the council code of conduct, you know, council may kind of mitigate or may weigh that risk and say, okay, well, we're not going to hire an investigator for this, and even if even if we find out that we made the wrong decision, the risk is not great. Now, when you're dealing with person-on-person conduct or financial implications or something like that, the risk is much greater. Um, and unfortunately, it just I think it almost becomes necessary in certain cases to hire an investigator, whether it's Veritas or another investigator, to look into the complaint and come to a finding.
In what ways does the threshold evaluation process and the code of conduct investigation strengthen public confidence in municipal governance?
Well, the threshold, I like the threshold because I mean we can dovetail a little bit into cost as well. As generally speaking, the threshold investigation is called a prima facie investigation or face value investigation. Like on its face, is this a valid complaint, right? So it's a quick dive into the issues at hand. You can analyze, okay, who made the complaint? What was the time frame? Does it comply with the requirements of the council code of conduct? And is the conduct itself uh, subject or like is the conduct itself fall within the council code of conduct's jurisdiction? So you can do that fairly quickly. So that's a very tactical, quick response, and they're not as expensive. They don't require the same amount of time, therefore they're not as expensive. And you can sometimes come to a finding that, hey, look, like this is not based on a reasonable interpretation of policy. This is not, or sorry, the bylaw. This is not a violation. This would not be considered a violation.
Can
And then
councils
and
can
then give that to council.
councils sorry, can councils bypass the threshold evaluation process if council says no, we need to have this done because public confidence in our council and what our council is doing is not there. So let's just have the full blown investigation. Let's bypass any sense that organization is going to come in and tell us if we've actually breached the code of conduct, and let's just have the investigation out.
Oh, absolutely. They can do that if that's 'cause ultimately counsel would be the client, right? So the
Yes.
client can ask for whatever. Where we would draw the line is when they start trying to challenge our findings or dictate how we prepare our reports and what information we use, who we investigate, that kind of stuff. These are all things that are integral to the investigative process and needs to be kind of hands off. So that's kind of be where we would draw the line on that. But yeah, if they're saying, you know what, don't bother, just do the whole thing. We'll pay for it. The risk is high, and we want to show members of the public that we're trying to be transparent here. So go for it, right? I think in some cases that might be money well spent.
You mentioned a few times, and anyone who's listened to this is probably within that municipal sector who's listening to this show or listens to any of my shows. How can municipalities improve transparency and communications about how code of conduct complaints are handled?
Um,
So after they're done, how should they be handling them to ensure that people understand that this has happened and this is what's transpired, or should
well,
they not?
many many communities will publish either the full report that's been redacted to be compliant with FOIP, or at least an abridged version of the findings, and they'll publish those publicly on their websites. They make them available to members of the public, and I think that. To me, that I mean, that's an enormously important step, is to say, look, we're not going to hide the results. We're going to have this investigation conducted, and we're going to show you what the results were, whether they're good or bad.
So I'm a political show, so I have to ask a few political questions here, Christopher, if that's okay. You have been doing investigations for a few years now, I would gather. What trends are you seeing? How have council code of conducts and that threshold evaluations evolved over the last few years? Or is it the same workings that you're dealing with from when you started to today?
Um, wouldn't say it's the same. There's always evolution. I think, as you know, public service, as far as elected officials go, they're more and more and more in the spotlight, rightfully or wrong. Fully, like when you interviewed the mayor of Rocky Mountain House, he was talking about how his wife doesn't go to the supermarket with him anymore because it's never a quick trip, right? So I see I've seen, at least my impression is that people are becoming more and more vocal about their elected officials, and I think that, and again, my own opinion, but municipal government is one of the truest forms of democracy, right? You have an elected official that is not insulated in any way whatsoever, from the people that voted or didn't vote for them, right? So they're held accountable every time they go out and get fuel. Trends like, I think people are becoming a little bit more and more aware of the council codes of conduct because they've been around now since 2017. They're evolving over time. They're becoming more complex, and just like any policy or bylaw, gaps are being filled in as they're identified. Oh, you know what? We missed this part. We should probably add this part in order to ensure that if it happens again, it can be properly addressed. Or, if you've ever been involved in policy creation or policy amending, it's essentially like the gaps get identified as you go forward. You do your best to create your basic or your platform, but then the gaps and the risks and the idiosyncrasies get identified as you kind of evolve through the process. So policies never really get shorter; they just get longer and longer and more specific. So you're seeing that. I think you're seeing that as you go forward. I think counselors are becoming more comfortable with codes of conduct because they're they've been subject to it before, or they've had to vote on it, right? And they're like, oh, okay, and so I think necessarily they're and also. So I think necessarily they're just becoming more and more aware of it, and we're approaching year three of the municipal election process, and likely, if you had all brand new councillors and mayors and reeves and that sort of thing elected in the last election. Where previously they might not have any awareness of what a code of conduct is, now by year three into year four, they should have some exposure to it, if not training, or maybe perhaps unfortunately haven't been subject to it themselves. So that's where I'm seeing the evolution. What I don't see is this fear that um, if we publicize this code of conduct, then we're just going to get inundated with complaints, and that's going to be an extreme cost to the municipality, and we can't absorb that. That's the financial risk for us. We can't absorb that. So I know with Medicine Hat, I know they've changed their code of conduct, but previously, the last iteration of the code of conduct only allowed for a councillor to make a complaint against another councillor or the mayor. Um, so a member of public couldn't actually make a complaint. It had to be brought forward by council. And they've since amended that to allow for a ratepayer to to lodge a complaint if they feel the need to do so. But that fear that you're going to be inundated. I've not seen that, and I mean maybe others have. I'm not the most prolific investigator of municipal government there is, but my experience has not been that people are bringing forward multiple frivolous complaints. Um,
What
I think they're getting more comfortable with it.
you've
Counseling.
seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of the process. I can imagine you've probably seen some good times, some bad times, and some really, really just interesting times. I'll leave it at that. What reforms or improvements could be made to make the current practices better, in your opinion?
Um,
Or what can municipalities do to improve the process and to improve the transparency so everyone knows? Because I'm a nerd. I like to read this type of stuff. I like to go in
yeah.
depth and read all this stuff. I can imagine because we are in, as I like to so eloquently call it, silly season in Alberta. And that means everyone and their mother is going to be looking at potentially running in this general election because we have a lot of armchair experts out there. And that's my saying that. That's not Christopher saying that. That's Christopher, the host, saying that. There's a lot of armchair experts who say, I can do it better and I can get in there and I can make it a lot better. What improvements or reforms can municipalities do to ensure that after October 20th, 2025, there isn't the frivolous investigations that need to happen? I don't say that willy-nilly, but there are sometimes that they do get called because of frivolous accusations. What reforms can municipalities put into place to improve the practices?
Well, first, let me address silly season, as you call it, where everybody and their dog is considering running for running for office or running to be elected. I say more power to them. I have Whether I agree with the politics or not, I have tremendous respect for elected officials. It is not an easy task, and it means that they have put their name forward because they've seen something that they didn't like and they want to do something about it. And I think that in and of itself is worthy of respect. I would certainly not put my name in to be an elected official, and anybody that does and takes on public service is worthy of some respect and admiration. Now, not always their conduct is not always worthy of respect and admiration, but if they approach it altruistically, then I think that my hat goes off to them. But as far as what you can do, first and foremost is training. When your newly elected council, dusts off their shiny new nameplates for the council chambers and stuff, uh, there's going to be a process, an orientation process that they have to go through. And part of that must be, I think very necessary for them to understand the code of conduct for their community and what it means as far as expected behaviors and also expected what they can expect if they breach those code of conduct statutes or sections. So that being aware of it, and then you know what, there's really nothing wrong with the public being aware of it. I mean, the public should be aware of it. It's a tool used to kind of enhance transparency with local government. So a communication campaign about what the code of conduct is, when it's appropriate, when there may be a perception that it's being abused, and the the evolution, the who the investigators are, like if they have an appointed integrity commissioner or an investigative firm such as Veritas that is has been retained to conduct these investigations, and I mean, public awareness, communication. Communication to me is always a big thing. I always say if you don't tell somebody something, they're going to assume that you're hiding something bad, and especially in government. And so, like, and I'm sure you've seen it before. Oh, they've had a closed session. I wonder what they're talking about, and realistically, it's just something that's private, and it's not for public consumption. It doesn't necessarily mean
Hypothetically,
it's
it
bad.
should be something private that is
You're
confidential.
you're you're right there. But generally speaking, when there's a gap in knowledge or a gap in communication,
Yeah.
nobody ever fills it in with information that or with speculation of something good happening, right? It's always something bad, right? So communication is an enormous tool, very, very effective tool for municipalities to kind of spread the word and help other people understand that one, what the code of conduct is, what the expectations of the counselors are, and that there's a process if it's not being followed.
Now, I just looked at the clock while you were talking there, and we're at almost at the hour mark here. And I have one last question before I start wrapping up. What do you want people to take away from this conversation? What do you want people to understand about the complexity of code of conduct investigations, the truth metric that we have not talked about yet?
I think they they need to be done properly. They need to be approached properly and neutrally and unbiased. If they're not done properly, if they're not done in a procedurally fair manner, if there's a perception of bias, all it does is erode public confidence, erode counselor or elected official confidence in the process as well. So and really the best way to do that, and I know it sounds self-serving, but is to hire an external investigator in order to conduct or oversee in as far as integrity commissioner goes, oversee these activities and provide guidance to council.
The integrity
Does that
commissioner
make
is not a,
sense?
yeah, it is. I just want to follow up on the integrity commissioner, because I know you are one for a municipality, but the integrity commissioner is not a full-time job. It's not like the integrity commissioner sits in the council, the town office 24/7, 7 days a week, right? It's basically like a legal lawyer. You come in when you're on retainer, correct?
Yes, sometimes you are. Sometimes it's just a contract or an agreement, and there's no retainer, but it's agreement to use your services as required.
Yeah.
I want to differentiate before we jump off here, but just the role of integrity commissioner versus an investigator. And the beauty about a firm like Veritas is that we have the ability to do both, but still maintain that perceptually unbiased stance of the integrity commissioner by having another investigator conduct the investigation, and then if any recommendations need to come from it, then that other part of the integrity commissioner, in this case it would be me for that municipality, is able to provide those recommendations without kind of like diving over that wall of unbiasedness that you're trying to erect, right? So because they're just going based off the report, not off personal experience and all that contextual information that we spoke about that may be in the back of the investigator's mind. So.
Understandable. And thank you so much for that clarification. Christopher, I want to thank you so much. I feel like we've unpacked barely a minimum of this grand scheme that is called Code of Conducts here in Alberta. I know they are Minister Rick McIver at the most recent RMA convention said they're going to be looking at overhauling or reviewing the Code of Conduct legislation that the provincial government has introduced and passed. So this conversation that we're having today is probably going to be obsolete by the time that conversation comes around or that new legislation comes around whenever the provincial government does decide to pass that. So it is the first conversation I think of many that we're probably going to be having heading into the municipal election. And we'd love to have you back on the show to continue this conversation and learn a little bit more about the process, the investigation, and how do people launch an investigation? Should people not launch an investigation? So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Sorry. Real life, my dog is barking in the background, so I'm having to lean in there. But no, I'm very happy to be on the show. I happily come on again. It's been a lot of fun, and I've really enjoyed speaking with you, Chris.
Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Municipal Affairs. Now, we hope you've enjoyed today's conversation and gained some valuable insights into the world of Council Code of Conduct. Now, to stay in the loop with all of our latest episodes, don't forget to head over to our website and hit that subscribe button or follow us on social media. For even more content and learn about today's stories and the organization that we chatted with, please visit us online at www.crossborderinterviews.ca. Your support means the world to us. So share this episode with your friends, tell your family members about it, and keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and we'll see you next time here on Municipal Affairs. Till then, everyone.